Hey everyone, Dave Greco here and welcome back to the channel. So today I want to show you the rest of the piece that we started on last week's video. If you missed last week's video, I'll have a link down below. It's the first 30 minutes in real time starting up a new piece and kind of the thoughts and kind of theories that I have about starting one. And this is actually the next 15 hours that it took for the rest of it. I shrunk the 15 hours into about 25 minutes. So we're going to be talking about our process and commentary over it. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. Before we get started, this video is sponsored by WACOM, a fantastic product, one that I have used for the past 17 years for all my digital art. It's tried and true, and it is reliable, and I absolutely love them. I'll have a bunch of links down below if you're ever looking to check out any of their product line. They are amazing, and I'd like to thank them again. All right, so let's get into what we've actually been working on here. So as you can see, I actually took the initial drawing and dropped it back a little bit. We're kind of going with the second phase of the line drawing. This is a part of the process that lets me kind of dive in a little bit deeper and kind of see what I want to do. I usually have these very loose sketches to start with. And so by going around the piece and trying to evaluate and find these little details, it actually kind of helps me explore and figure out the entire thing. A lot of paintings I kind of just jump right into. I don't have a lot planned. Sometimes I have a bigger plan in my head if I kind of see something early. But sometimes like these pieces that I'm just doing for fun, it's really a big part of like exploration for me. I like to find the piece as I work on it. I get a lot of feedback from people in chat when we're painting it on Twitch. That could kind of change the direction of the piece. And so that's always fun to incorporate into it. So I like finding the whole thing as we go. And so I stay pretty zoomed out like I usually do. A lot of canvas flipping. I do flip the canvas like crazy. So definitely be ready for that. That is always an important thing. No matter what you're painting, to be flipping it and making sure it reads well, flip both ways. And it's just a great brain reset for every time you're painting. Yeah, so like I was doing before, I'm still going around with a lot of the line work. And a lot of people ask me like, why do I spend so much time doing line work when I'm going to just paint over it later? And that's a totally valid point. I definitely probably waste a bit of time doing the line work when it does get painted over. I do let some of the line work kind of bleed through and sit into the final piece. But for me, I find creating the line work and line weight just super relaxing. And it just helps me figure out the actual design of the characters and shapes of everything. So I just like that phase of the painting, even if we do end up painting over quite a bit of it. I just really enjoy it. And so, actually watching a lot of these time lapses and kind of what we've been working on, it's actually helping me kind of grow my own process. Like looking back, like what can I actually fix and change to kind of speed up my own process going forward? Like, am I wasting too much time on some of these early phases? What can I do differently? And so, we're always growing. We're always trying to figure out how to do this better. So this is basically, I'm starting to use just a multiply layer and just throwing down some kind of quick color. Really just kind of like local color. Like I had this idea of it being kind of like this kind of dusky, bluish kind of evening. I wasn't sure if I was going to have like a more kind of like a orange on the horizon, so it wasn't just flat blue in the background, but at the same time I'll start kind of dropping in local color on the character itself. Like I know she's gonna have this kind of like more of a redhead orange hair, which I tend to do sometimes. I do love it. And then really kind of throwing down some basic color for her as well. Part of this phase, I could spend more time figuring out the value of the character versus the background, making sure she reads properly off it. But we kind of hopped into color a little bit early, for me at least. I think spending a little more time figuring out those values and the lighting probably would have paid off, I think. But I think we got there in the end. It just took a little bit longer. And so right now I'm throwing down some of the blue. I'm just trying to break up some of the design. I kind of had this like chest piece on her, but I really didn't have any design elements to it. I figure if I can throw some of that color in, then I can actually break that apart later with some more line work and actually figure it out. So this is a good way. I just make like an overlay layer and kind of throw on some kind of lights on her to try to start to figure out some type of lighting scenario. Figure out good lighting so we can actually bring out the form of the character is so important. You really want to avoid your characters feeling flat later. And the big part of that is figuring out the lighting scenario. How are we going to bring those forms forward? As you see here too, she actually has different eyes than we did in the final. I actually did like 3 versions of her eyes. I kind of liked these ones here, but they didn't really reflect the vibe of the character I was going for. She looked pretty suspicious. I kind of wanted that, but it just didn't feel right to me. This was the second set of eyes I blocked in really quick. And we actually end up changing these ones a little bit too. I think I like the overall eye shape, but I didn't really like her just kind of staring off into space. Kind of like she's looking towards the future. It didn't really kind of fit what I was going with either. So we do kind of tackle that layer, and we kind of drop her upper eyelids down and have her looking more at the camera. I still wanted this feeling that she's kind of looking at the viewer, almost like she's wondering what you're doing here. Right, I kind of like that whole idea as we went forward. So a lot of this is starting to, you can see me actually throwing flat color over a lot of that line work. But I do let some of it stay, and then I go back in with a little bit more line work. I'm telling you, my process lately is getting a little crazy. So we're probably spending a little bit more time than is necessary. But sometimes if that's how your brain has to figure stuff out, that's what we gotta do. So I think we're just messing with some different pupils and seeing what we want to do with that. Like I said, a lot of this whole process is exploration for me. And just figuring out what's reading, what's not. Everything felt like kind of like too light and washed out. This is the part of the painting that just drives me the most crazy. Where it feels like muddy, you don't have like good color direction. You just kind of question everything that you're doing. So once I can actually get more contrast and light figured out, you can start to build more confidence in the piece, and that's super important. So I'm constantly making new shapes and lines around her. Every little shape, all the negative space between shapes, I always feel like it has to read pretty well and feel nice. So I'm constantly kind of going back and forth and seeing what works and what doesn't. We're slowly starting to bring out the form in her face too, like her cheekbone and that mask. Like I can't really tell, like, is it a mask? Is it face paint? It could be either one. And really kind of start bringing that out. And then I'll start bringing in a little bit more contrast, a little bit more line work, and then I'll just go back and forth. As you can see right now, there's still kind of like a washiness to the entire color of the piece, and that's fine. I think it's good just to stay loose, and I'm bouncing around the piece as much as possible. And this is how I start to build color and saturation in my work too. Like, it's all pretty muted right now. Like, the colors are pretty simple, nothing's really yelling out. And then some of the hair right there, some of that orange, I could slowly start bringing that color forward, and then just like a little bit more saturation, a little bit more saturation. Where do I want the really hot spots of color to kind of sing to you and to kind of get your eye focused on it? What's like super important and feels good. So that's why I think it's good to always start kind of pretty desaturated and then go up. It's hard if you make the whole piece crazy colorful, and it's hard to knock back areas without making them feel like they're too gray or washed out later. So yeah, we spent quite a bit of time trying to get all these little shapes up by her face. The head and shoulder area is so important, and so important to me, that I feel like if we can get this part, the rest of the piece, we can kind of get it to follow suit, right? And so it's worth the time for me to kind of go around and figure that out. I still think I have like part of comic books and comic book work as influences a lot of my art these days and what I do. I see it more and more with especially with a lot of the painting recently, and keeping kind of that line weight and line work into it, which I like. I like that I have kind of a lot of how I paint and how I like inking and comic book work, and I feel like they're kind of bleeding into my style, even more so I think than it used to. I'm really trying to embrace it lately. And so this is a great part too, and I can really start to add in a bunch of different color. And I talk to a lot of people when I'm reviewing their portfolios about like variants of color, right? Instead of just having like a skin tone, it's just like this is the color and it's the exact same color from like top to bottom, and the shadows are just like a little bit darker, and the highlights just a little bit lighter of the exact same tone. You know, just having like a little bit more kind of like oranges and pinks, or you know, these kind of more yellow highlighted areas. It just adds so much more kind of life and believability to the skin. And as something in like just everything that you do, just little pockets of little different colors all around. And I'll even start to get lots of different color kind of in her hair as well. I think it just makes it more interesting than kind of like one flat color that just coats the whole area. So, you know, as most people know, I do really enjoy painting hair. I'm not sure why, but I think I always really love the abstract shapes of it. That was actually me messing with the curves real quick. Sometimes I'll throw the curves up and that just gets the contrast going a little bit more, kind of have a little bit more control over where that contrast is going. Yep, so we're still just going around, I think just cleaning up all the little pockets of hair. And see all these little negative shapes in the hair and kind of between the folds. I'm always looking at all that stuff and how it reads, and if there's a nice shape in between it, and make sure that feels good. I actually spent quite a bit of time on this head area. I think I just went back and forth a lot on trying to kind of make it feel that the way that I want. And I do think that's important. You know, if something's not feeling right to you, or if it's reading wrong, you know, spend the time to either wipe it out, fix it, make it right, spend the time that you want to make it feel good to you. I think that's super important. You know, a lot of people ask me like, when do I know when a piece is done? It's usually just when like an area of the piece doesn't bother me anymore, or the piece at one point doesn't bother me anymore. Like there's nothing that's standing out to me that like, this is so like glaringly unfinished, this little section. So this is me right here actually fixing those eyes. I actually took the top eyelids, brought them down a little bit, and then just angled her eyes more looking at you, and that felt like way closer to the vibe that I was shooting for. I really like the kind of attitude that she was giving you at this point. And so that felt really good to me. That's always a good feeling when you kind of settle on something and it feels right, and then you get kind of like that crazy painting energy you want to finish the piece. Alright, so we're still just going around the piece and kind of refiguring out her armor and what she's actually wearing. A lot of it I hadn't actually figured out before, so I was like, she's got this kind of like armband thing on. I don't know if she's got these kind of like bracers. So these are things we kind of figure out how as we paint. You know, you could just spend a lot of time really figuring out some really, really cool armor. And I, you know, looking back, maybe I should spend that time even before we jump into what is like a kind of a full painting like this. But sometimes I like to wing it, and then maybe it reads as something reasonable. Sometimes it doesn't, but you know, we try. Yep, so still just going back and forth around. I actually ended up fixing her arm that's holding the strap at one point. It looked a little too long, especially from elbow to wrist. You can kind of see it right here. Those are the kind of things you kind of look at as you kind of clean up your sketch and go into the render. You're just kind of double checking like a lot of anatomy stuff and proportions, making sure it's just, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. As long as it just looks like it looks right on the character. And this was kind of like a strange character to do anyway. Like we really joked that was she was more kind of like a tauntaun instead of like a centaur, since she just has the two legs down there. And we definitely kind of, you know, she's got this kind of like thickness to her too, which I actually thought was pretty cool and made her design a little different. So as you can see from before, like we're just starting to juice up the color more and more, just a little bit as we go, in little areas. And then we can kind of create little bands of shadows as we pump up that saturation and seeing what works and what doesn't work. But you can still see that like a lot of that line work, even from before, I let to hang out, and it kind of like creates a lot of interesting decisions for me going forward. So we tried a couple things in our strap. We were gonna have like these little baubles and glasses and stuff, but it didn't really feel right for our character. This is actually an interesting direction since we were doing this on stream. So if anyone's not following me on Twitch, you can always go to twitch.tv/DaveGrecoArt and do a lot of painting on there. And this is actually something that just started happening as we were talking to chat. There was this idea that she was kind of rising these spirits from the ground, and that the staff with that glowing edge, it's almost like she taps it on the ground and kind of just like does this ripple echo, and then the dead kind of follow her, some type, almost like a spirit collar. And I definitely thought that was a pretty sweet idea. I ended up not putting a lot of the creatures and everything in the final piece. It's more as of a reason that I'm just trying to kind of control my output of work lately. I'm getting kind of like super into these pieces and just adding more and more and more, and then I just get sucked in for like 40 hours on a piece when it's really hard to afford that much time right now in one. So try and take it back. Like if it reads right and it's a cool piece, maybe I don't have to add like 1,000 things into it. I'm blaming you, Final Fantasy 14 piece. But a lot of that kind of vibe and direction that we got from right here, I tried to keep it going. So I ended up changing the color of her chest plate. It was kind of more like that brownish leather, but it seemed like it kind of matched the bottom part of her body too much. And so to me, it seemed like confusing if it was actually a piece of armor or her skin. So I figured just change the color completely, so it's not even like really a question. The legs were actually tough for me for a little bit. I wasn't sure what to do with the color. I wanted kind of more of like a vibrant, I don't know, fade into more of a vibrant violet something down there. But I still wanted to read and feel like, I don't know, it took me a little bit to really figure that out. We tried a couple different shapes down here. I was trying some type of like skirt that came forward. And I was thinking like maybe we don't have to put anything down there. We're just gonna leave it bare on the bottom half. We suppose it's okay. And we're just still putting, adding little details. Maybe she's got some maps and scrolls that she carries on the side as well. But there's still tons of that early sketch that we haven't addressed yet. And even when I'm painting on it, like it can drive me crazy. So it makes me wonder about going back to my process and like, do I need to spend so much time doing all that extra line stuff for the environment or the background, when really ultimately I do erase most of it. Because there's a point coming up soon where I feel like I need to address her based off the background and how much does she pop off it, right? Is the value of her too close? Does she feel like she's actually in the space, or is that sky behind her feel like super close to her? And I want the contrast of her to pop like quite a bit more. So really for these bottom parts, it's really just kind of, it's like I'm polishing while trying to think of what I'm going to do. Really not sure what I'm gonna do with the ground yet. We had this idea of water or kind of glowing ground. Wasn't super sure. Yeah, there we go. We ended up getting rid of that arm because it was looked too long. So now she just doesn't have an elbow, but we kind of blocked a quick little one in, and it felt a little bit better. You know, it's a great comparison. You kind of just look at the arm on the other side, and does it kind of look like their elbow would be kind of in the same place, and that helps quite a bit. Yeah, so I'm constantly just hitting little points all over the painting, kind of as fast as possible. And making sure it's just like lots and lots of little details and polish points going around and around. Little highlights here, little shadow here. It's like you're starting in the middle of a painting, you're pushing little highlights, you're pushing a little shadow, little highlights, little shadow. And then hopefully you get to a point where it starts working as an entire piece. So I really wanted to dive in and get a little bit more of that kind of shadow that might be happening on the ground right there. And I'm starting to erase that kind of tree shape behind her more and more, just so I can kind of focus on her and pull her forward, and then we'll go back and figure out the background. And so like this from before, we're popping that color just a little bit more and more. See, and then it's actually time to start tackling some of these background objects. and get rid of a lot of that line work. And then I decided like we really need to push a lot of this whole sky back. Now I also thought that like instead of kind of like a darker tree shape behind her, it'd be kind of nice to have a lighter tree shape, just so she pops even a little bit more, and you know, it can just feel like a lighter background. I don't want it to feel so heavy. So we're just kind of like blocking these, you know, what shapes and silhouettes of the branches work. So usually I'll block a shape in, and then I'll just have like a solid eraser, and then I'll just kind of like go with some like really hard edge brush and just kind of like knock out the silhouette and see what works or not. But working on this like simple tree shape back here was actually a lot of fun. You know, I don't have to go too crazy. I ended up at one point kind of blocking in like a ton of like crazy abstract leaf shapes. It just felt like too much with me, and we end up erasing it, but we should see that coming up as well. So I just kind of take like an airbrush, and I just want everything totally like obliterated. I like, let's just get that back so it feels right, and then let's start pushing everything back on. That's why like some of that line drawing I was doing at the beginning probably is ultimately like a waste, but this was part of the whole spirit idea. For some reason, I keep my painting up on my computer when I'm like taking breaks around the house, and I just walked by and I looked at it and I was like, it would look cool with this kind of spirit. I don't know. It's not like an aurora borealis, but some kind of like crazy spirit mist behind her that could give this like stripe of color. And that's really all it is. I just thought it would help bring a little bit of life to the piece, and sometimes that's all you need. I just thought it was kind of neat. Here's that shape I was thinking of. I think it could have been cool if it was like a whole canopy behind her and went back. But it felt like it went too kind of, I don't know, kind of like horizontal across the whole top. It didn't have like the kind of flow. I think it could have went in a direction that was interesting, but I'm not going with it. And so right here, we're putting a little bit more kind of like fade of color. I wanted to go from a little bit more orange to a little bit of pink. I just thought it'd be kind of interesting. And we'll keep bringing that. And then, you know, start to bring a little bit of light so we can bring some of the form of the trees in the background forward. You know, we're just, you know, we're pushing and pulling everything, seeing what works. Get a little bit more kind of highlights so we can get her form coming forward. And then I was trying to get just a little bit more kind of like shadow shapes on the trees behind. I actually let some of those shadow shapes kind of stay in the end. But you know, it's always worth trying this stuff, especially if you pop it on a new layer. You know, if it doesn't work, you can always just pop it right off. It's pretty easy. You know, sometimes painting these little side rocks are kind of entertaining, but sometimes they're a little monotonous. You know, we could have done a bunch of stuff. Like this is a piece we really could have, you know, I know in the first 30 minutes we talked about having all these kind of like pixies hanging out with her and all this, you know, and you really could. We could spend easily another 10 hours on this piece and just flush it with like a ton of life, you know, spirits in the background, the pixies hanging out with her. You could go nuts, right? You really could go crazy. But sometimes just like enough of these abstract shapes for the bottom and the rocks, sometimes it's like enough. You know, you can leave some parts of it that aren't crazy detailed. You know, she's the focus of the piece. She's the main character. I thought she was interesting, and I think she can carry a lot of the piece. So it's just like, you know, little rocks, little reflections, little kind of loose blades of grass. You know, we could spend more time figuring out the staff and all the little details of it and how that all works. Yeah, I figure she probably needed another hand at one point. Yeah, that's definitely like a deep dive later on kind of figuring out what this staff is. I thought the overall silhouette worked for it. This was just messing around with some brushes, tweaking it around. Maybe she has some type of kind of like spirit energy that comes off it. I thought it was a nice little addition to it. But pretty much this is really the whole piece and my whole process is really just kind of like going around step by step, seeing what colors work. I'm pushing the colors a little bit more, and then that is it. This was a really fun piece to work on. I really loved how this one came out. I really enjoyed the rendering. It was great that it just kind of happened from our video from last week. And we just took it to final, and this is the way I work, and I hope you can take some of this process into your own work. And that's about it. here is the final of her again. And thank you everybody so much, and we'll see you in the next video.